حي على الفلاح.
Welcome all to this discussion on the life of Shaykh Abdul Fattah Abu Ghuddah. One of the scholars or the teachers of Shaykh was Mustafa Az-Zarqa. He was with him or knew him for about 60 odd years of his life. And he writes that I bear witness over the course of the years that I have known Abdul Fattah Abu Ghuddah. I have never ever seen a problem that can be criticized about his taqwa, about his God-fearingness, about his behavior, about the manner that he had towards knowledge, about his loyalty in friendship, about his grace, about his friendship, and about his honesty and about his trust. And he said he was open-minded. And he explained that this open-mindedness of Shaykh Abdul Fattah Abu Ghuddah led him to go through a lot of problems as well. Because a person who has an open mind, they end up realizing that khair could be anywhere in the ummah. So they don't end up becoming sectarian, and that leads to different people who are extremely sectarian individuals in every single party to try to say, why are you listening to that? Why are you reading that? Why are you writing that? Why are you publishing that? Why are you? So he said this ended up leading to a lot of problems, but he ended up very, very patiently enduring all of those issues. Abdul Fattah ibn Muhammad ibn Bashir ibn Hassan Abu Ghuddah al-Khalidi, because he's from the progeny of Khalid ibn al-Walid. He's known as Abu al-Futuh, and he's known as Abu Zahid as well. And his father, Muhammad, was in business, but the thing about his father was he was very close to ulama. He was not a scholar, he was not a talib ilm, but he was one of those people who used to love knowledge, learn from them, and at times he would also have stories that he would retain from the gatherings that he had attended of knowledge, and he would tell it off to his children. And Shaykh Abdul Fattah says at times, as I would be reading, that I heard this from my father. Even though his father was not a person of knowledge, but because he would hear things from people of knowledge that were around him, the gatherings that he would regularly attend, he would be able to pass some of these things down to his children. And as his son became a great scholar of Islam, he would remember those comments that his father had made. Now, Shaykh Abdul Fattah was born in the city of Aleppo. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to revive this city. Ameen ya Rabbil Alameen. He was born in 1917. He started seeking knowledge at a young age, but then he stopped in the middle. And along with his knowledge that he was seeking, he was getting just generally good tarbiyah from his father and from the family and from people who were around him. His father being in business, and later his business didn't do as well as he used to in the beginning. His father gave him many opportunities because he would finance him, he would take care of him. He entered school at the age of 8. And like a person, he was very smart and very intellectual. He picked up a lot in a very short period of time. His reading ability became very good, refined. This was a very early portion of his life. But after that, as I said, he got occupied with business and life again. So around 19 years of age, he comes back now to regain the ability to learn. He enters into a school known as Al-Madrasa Al-Khusrawiyya. He's learning ulum al-shara', within which a lot of different scholars were there. So his early education was all done during this phase. His early education, meaning his early Islamic education. Before that, he was learning to read and write. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blessed him to go to Jami' al-Azhar. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in fact, bestowed upon him a great blessing when he went to Al-Azhar, because he was able to meet with a number of different scholars, of whom insha'Allah ta'ala we'll mention a few as well. After he completed his degree at Al-Azhar, along with the studies that he was doing with the scholars outside, and along with the very, very regular and keenness that he had of visiting bookstores and collecting books, he had a very, very spectacular library. After he graduated from Al-Azhar, he did a short diploma in education as well. A background in education, just as he had a background in Sharia as well. And he collected that very, very well together in the book that he wrote about Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the educational theory of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Rasul al-Muallim, right? That was one of his masterpieces. Amongst the jobs that he had done, He was a high school teacher for a little while. And so he was promoted to a university teacher as well. And it's a very, very big skill to be able to teach people at different levels. Then he moved on to Kulliyat al-Sharia in Riyadh, which of course later became a grander project and became Jami'at al-Imam. And also he taught in Ma'had al-Ali al-Qada, which was again attached to Jami'at al-Imam later on as well. And he was one of the founding members of the Muslim World League as well. So he was working in very many different fronts. He even traveled to Afghanistan. And the type of problems that were happening in Afghanistan, he was amidst the people who tried to exert positive energy to stop those problems. People only know this side of the Shaykh where ilm and so on. He was very occupied with ilm, but he did have a positive influence on the greater society, ensuring that the Muslim Ummah is somehow protected from the fitan of these times as well. And then last but not least, and this was pretty much the last of his jobs, he taught in Kulliyat al-Tarbiyah, Qism al-Dirasat al-Islamiyah in Jami'at al-Imam. Shaykh Abdul Fattah Abu Ghuddah had taken, remember he's from Aleppo, so obviously Damascus was the closest place to travel. So he did travel to Damascus. He benefited from the scholars of Damascus as well. Similarly, he traveled to Egypt, the scholars in Al-Azhar. Remember, Egypt is a place where there's a lot of unique ideas. People of various different backgrounds, they end up coexisting, or even if they don't coexist too well, but they end up remaining there. This is the reality of Egypt, and for a very long time. So during that time, he benefited from Mustafa Sabri, as we said. During that time, he also benefited from Muhammad Zahid al-Kawthari. During that time, he benefited from Muhammad al-Khadr Hussein. Muhammad al-Khadr Hussein was the first mufti of Al-Azhar that happened to be from non-Egyptian origin. Similarly, Ahmed Shakir as well. Similarly, Hassan al-Banna, he used to attend also the lessons of Hassan al-Banna. When he went to the Haramain, you'll see a diversity in the scholars that he's gaining from. He studied from Alawi al-Maliki, the father of Sayyid Muhammad Alawi al-Maliki, and he studied from Hassan Mushat, he studied from Muhammad Yasin al-Fadani. They say Shaykh Yasin al-Fadani, he became really famous because of Shaykh Abdul Fattah Abu Ghuddah. Similarly, he went to India and Pakistan, he went to Iraq as well. And during his trip to India and Pakistan, of course, India and Pakistan were the places that he would very regularly visit, especially Pakistan. From there, he gathered a number of different manuscripts that were not known in the Arab world. And that's why if you notice from his books, you'll see that a number of his books actually happen to be from the scholars of Pakistan and India. And during his trips to India and Pakistan, or the Indian subcontinent, he met scholars such as Muhammad Zakaria al-Kandahlawi. He met, also of course, he met Abu Hassan Ali al-Nadawi. He met Muhammad Yusuf al-Kandahlawi, the author of Hayat al-Sahaba, and a number of other scholars as well. One of the books that he gathered and he was in search for a very long time was a book by Muhammad Anwar Shah al-Kashmiri. This is a very famous scholar in Pakistan and India, in that subcontinent. He was a very strong scholar of hadith. Amidst his trips also were a number of trips that he had made to Morocco. And that was based on the request of the king himself, a regular habit of inviting scholars from different parts of the world where they end up giving a dars. And since he developed this relationship, he used it towards the advantage of ilm as well. And similarly, he traveled to Sudan as a teacher, he traveled to Yemen as well, he traveled to Turkey. And you can see over here that when he writes his book, Safahat min Sabr al-Ulama, pages from the patience of the scholars, and he talks about rihla fil ilm, right? He talks about traveling for knowledge. He himself is traveling a lot. He was a regular traveler. He's one of the most traveled people in terms of, for the sake of knowledge, teaching and preaching as well. He traveled to a number of different countries to gift knowledge to the scholars of those countries as well, and to benefit from those scholars as well. So he went to Kuwait, he went to Tunisia, he went to Algeria, he went to Jordan, he went to Palestine prior to the occupation. He also went to Qatar, he went to Somalia, he went to South Africa, he went to Indonesia, he went to Brunei, and he went to Europe, he went to America, he even went to Canada. As I said, his son actually lives in Canada, and a number of other places that he had went to. One of the places that he would regularly be in would be Lebanon, because Lebanon was a printing hub of the Ummah, And it remains one of the greatest places where books are printed till today as well. He would go there to ensure that his books are being printed well, and so on and so forth. He was very keen on printing books. He wishes to get this effort out and ensure that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala records his reward. I'm just going to mention one story. Is recorded in his tahqiq of the book التصريح بما تواتر في نزول المسيح. He was in search for this book for a very, very long time. He searched far and wide to find this book. And when he finally found the book, he was very happy firstly. And he was also on his way back to the airport. He had to leave. He was in Pakistan. Remember, Pakistan and India, he traveled there many, many times to gain benefit from the scholars. And he was in Karachi, in the airport. And as he is sitting in the airport, and this, by the way, is one of the most beautiful signs of how keen he was on time. He was sitting at the airport, and all of the ulama from there, they decided to accompany him. So they came simply to see him off, right? So suddenly they announced that the flight will be 2 hours late. So now he insisted further that now you have to leave, it's 2 hours late. So they said, no, we're going to sit here with you. Now he looked at himself as a student of theirs, but in reality they felt they were his students as well. So they all sat together in the airport. He said, if you are all here, then why don't we read a little bit? Why don't we benefit from our time while we are still over here? So then he ended up picking up the book and he started to read the muqaddimah that was written by Muhammad Shafi' al-Uthmani, and then they read some of the ahadith. So you can see, even at a moment where people are trying to socialize or people are, so he doesn't end up wasting the time of these scholars. And this is how they ended up spending their time, and tears were in their eyes when they were all departing one another. And honestly, the scene as Shaykh Abdul Fattah Abu Ghuddah paints it is very, very beautiful. And many of the scenes, wallahi, one of the things that I think is very important along with this particular gathering is to gather the scenes from the life of Shaykh Abdul Fattah Abu Ghuddah, not just a biography. Because if you look through his books, you'll notice that he records some of these scenes that occurred. We come to the aspect of life where he would be with the general people. It is very important for a scholar to have his private time, to be able to be with books, to correct the mistakes that have occurred, to produce new knowledge, to actually make a movement. But simultaneously, it is just that important for that scholar to be with the ummah as well, regularly. And he was definitely with the ummah, as he used to have a regular khutbah that he would do, especially when he used to be in Sham. And in addition to that, he would also have a regular dars in fiqh every single Monday. And he would have a dars in hadith as well, every Thursday. And the shaykh would generally make himself available to the ummah as well. One of the things you will see glaring, and I mean literally glaring, is that the shaykh had a lot of nur on his face. And the Prophet ﷺ, he said that, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala illuminate the face of a person who hears my statements, understands and preserves it, and then passes it on just as he had heard it. The one thing that we know that is a common denominator in every single writing, literally, and that's very remarkable, by the way. What I mean by every single writing is not books that he would publish. Anything he would write would be accuracy and perfection. And that's why anything that he wrote kind of became a document that could be used to define the life of Shaykh Abdul Fattah Abu Ghuddah. And I say this with knowledge of the fact that not every scholar has this quality. This is a very unique quality. Qualities of the Shaykh really are just too many. He was very, very neat, very clean, and he had a good taste for books, clothes, food and drinks. He would cry a lot, and you can see that, wallahi, when you look at his face. So he had a very, very soft heart which would tear up as soon as the Shaykh would hear of anything that would make him go towards that angle. And he himself writes to us and tells us of a number of the shuyukh that he had studied with. That one of the most early shuyukh that he had studied with was a man by the name of Isa al-Bayanuni. Of course, he has over 190 shuyukh, but he describes the main ones in a very, very beautiful way. It could tell you feelings that Shaykh Abdul Fattah Abu Ghuddah had towards his teachers, and that's very, very important to note. And these are the memories that Shaykh Abdul Fattah Abu Ghuddah recorded of his teachers, including the likes of Isa al-Bayanuni. and Ibrahim al-Silqini, and of course none other than Muhammad Raghib al-Tabbakh. Now these are all scholars, they should have biographies on their own, so I won't get into their lives, but nonetheless I will mention some of the most famous and prominent names. Another one of his shuyukh, Mustafa Sabri, is a scholar who was amidst the people who were entitled Shaykh al-Islam. You can almost consider him something similar to the Prime Minister of the Ottoman Empire. Because remember, scholars historically had a lot of power as well. And he left behind a work which is very, very impressive, and that is his work, Mawqif al-Aqli wal-Ilm. This is a very, very important work in which he debated the philosophers of modern day. Another one of his scholars and teachers was Muhammad Zahid al-Kawthari. One of the things about him was that he had written a lot against Ibn Taymiyyah and against the Salafi movements and so on and so forth, which led to a lot of negativity towards him. And that led in turn to negativity towards Shaykh Abdul Fattah Abu Ghuddah. Now, he's before two choices. He can either disown one of his most prized teachers, because he's living in a country where perhaps it's not favorable for him to continue to affiliate with Muhammad Zahid al-Kawthari. And the second choice that he has is he continues to uphold the adab of a student of knowledge, that he is my teacher, I will respect him, but that doesn't mean I obey him in everything he believes. And the second one comes with outcomes, as I said, especially because of the situation that he's in. He's living in Saudi Arabia, and remember at that time, a lot of different scholars were attempting to discredit Shaykh Abdul Fattah Abu Ghuddah. I'm not going to get into that a lot, because they say the statements of scholars of old are just to be taped up and put away, and we don't necessarily narrate them on. But very briefly I will, because I want you to realize that no one reaches the heights except that they are tested very severely. So one of the tests that he had went through, Shaykh Abdul Fattah Abu Ghuddah, they had written to him and they had asked him to grade Shaykh al-Albani's book on Sharh al-Aqeedah al-Tahawiyya. Okay, he has some tahqiqat on it. One particular point, Shaykh al-Albani and Abdul Fattah Abu Ghuddah disagreed on. The way the disagreement came about is, Zuhair al-Shawish, he gave him a copy of the new print with Shaykh al-Albani's tahqiqat. At the bottom, Shaykh al-Albani had said, Sahih al-Bukhari, and this happens to be Sahih as well. So Shaykh Abdul Fattah said, if it's from Bukhari, we don't need to say it's Sahih. Because when we say it's Sahih, it ends up looking as if, in reality, there's also da'if hadith in Bukhari as well. We don't need to repeat the fact that it's Sahih, because Bukhari is already authentic, making it very summarized. He told that to the printing company, and then things remain normal so far. Eventually, Shaykh Yusuf al-Qaradawi and a couple of other scholars, they met together. One day they were just having a meeting, and Shaykh Albani was there as well, and Shaykh Abdul Fattah Abu Ghuddah was there as well. Shaykh Yusuf al-Qaradawi brought it up, and they started discussing this point. Things started to get a bit salty, but still they settled afterwards. Now later on, Shaykh Abdul Fattah Abu Ghuddah, he wrote an academic criticism of the book, and he gave it to the Kulliyah, and that led to a lot of different problems within his life, which he reported and he extensively spoke of in his book Kalimat. Even if you read his books in which he discussed this matter, you'll notice that despite all of the negativity, he was a person of calm demeanor. You could notice that he was exemplifying within his life. We need to take from the life of Shaykh Abdul Fattah Abu Ghuddah that one quality that is a glaring quality throughout his life. He was not a sectarian man. He was a man who would always attempt to unite the ummah. To a degree that book that we were discussing, Kalimat, that book, he ended up withholding it with him for 15 years, didn't release it. Until finally it got out of hand. And then some of the scholars, they said to him, you have to explain your situation, what's happening? You know, people are now starting to have negative ideas about you. You have to explain what you truly believe. You have to explain what some of these fabrications around you are. At that moment, with the istishara of many of the scholars, he ended up releasing that under a lot of pressure. And even that, as I said, if you read the book, you'll find that he was very, very cautious in the words and the statements that he uses. Now, towards the end of his life, the Shaykh ended up becoming sick. He had an issue with his eye, and can you guess why he had that issue? Of course, because of how much he would read. It ended up affecting his eyes, and he had an operation, and the operation didn't actually go too well, okay? The operation occurred in Riyadh, then he had a second operation, and eventually in the year 1417, 20 odd years ago, he ended up passing away. You see, one of the things recorded by Shaykh Muhammad Taqi Uthmani. Till the end of his life, he was still busy with writing, authoring, ensuring that his works are printed and so on and so forth, to a degree that Abdul Sattar, Abu Ghuddah, he was with him. Shaykh Abdul Fattah Abu Ghuddah, he mentioned that towards the end of his life, when he opened his eyes, he said that, has that book been printed? And then he closed his eyes, and that was amidst the last things that was heard of the Shaykh. That till that moment he was keen that what I've written, I wish it ends up becoming amidst the people so it doesn't get lost. Because there's a lot of things that people write and they end up becoming lost. This is a glaring portion of the legacy of Shaykh Abdul Fattah Abu Ghuddah, is that he attempted his best to decrease differences of opinion within the ummah. Wallahi, the last thing we need is more differences of opinion and being at the throats at one another. Decrease them, mitigate them. So he wrote entire books, or perhaps published entire books, in hope that people will read these and the problems would in fact become mitigated. And one of the things that he wrote in this particular vein is a statement to the same effect that I spoke. But then he said, he quoted the hadith of Rasulullah saying, whoever prays our prayer, whoever faces our qibla, whoever eats our dhabiha, then that person is in fact a Muslim, and he has the trust of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the trust of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam. So do not break the trust of Allah. Then before that, in explanation of this hadith, he said that hence our love and our affiliation and our allegiance in Islam is simply for the sake of Islam. So long as someone is within the folds of Islam, remember your allegiance is still due to that individual. Sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in.